Guts joins the band of the Hawk, the beginning of the Brotherhood. Before the Dragon Slayers and the Demons, before the Brand and the Eclipse, or even Revenge, there was a boy with a sword too large for his frame, and a burden far too heavy for his age. Guts didn't come from nobility or prophecy. He was born on a corpse pile and raised by mercenaries who taught him that the only rule in life was to keep moving or be trampled. Every battle he survived wasn't a triumph, it was just another day alive. He didn't fight for glory, he fought to end the fight before it ended him. There was no dream, no belonging, just the clang of steel and the cold silence afterwards. But then came Griffith and changed everything. Griffith wasn't like other commanders Guts had seen. He didn't just lead, he captivated. He looked at Guts with no fear or scorn, but with fascination. As if Guts was more than just a weapon, as if he was a piece of a greater design. Their first meeting wasn't a greeting, it was a duel. Moonlight on steel, blades flashing in the quiet. And then, when Griffith defeated him, he didn't mock him. He smiled, as if to say, "Now you're mine." And strangely, that wasn't a prison. It felt like acceptance. Guts didn't join the band of the Hawk because he wanted to. He was claimed. Not with chains, but with purpose. And for the first time, he wasn't treated like a beast of war. He was treated like a brother, like a comrade around campfires. He laughed on the battlefield. He fought not just to survive, but to protect. They bled together, celebrated together, mourned together. They weren't just mercenaries. They were family. And for a fleeting moment, Guts believed he found his place. Not just as a pawn, not as a stray, but as someone who belonged. He looked at Griffith and saw someone he could follow, someone whose dream he could stand behind, even if it wasn't his own. But this is Berserk, and nothing good lasts without blood, because the world that gave him peace would soon ask for it back. And the more light Guts found, the deeper the shadows began to stretch behind him. Brotherhood, in this story, isn't armor, it's foreshadowing. Guts versus 100 soldiers. The beast awakens. There are battles that define warriors, and then there are battles that transform them. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't war. It was something purer, darker. Guts, wounded and haunted, cornered in the woods by 100 armed men. Men with orders to bring him down. Men who outnumbered him 100 to 1. Didn't hesitate. He didn't beg. He didn't run. He moved. Not with grace, not with finesse, but with raw animal fury. A swinging slab of iron in his hands, each blow splitting flesh and armor like kindling. He didn't see faces. He didn't hear names. Only threats, only targets, only movement and blood. This wasn't a sword fight. It was a butchery. And Guts, he wasn't a human in that moment. He was a storm, a howl of the rage in a human skin. Soldiers screamed. They cried, they begged, none of it mattered. He was beyond mercy, beyond exhaustion, a walking wound, dragging a body held together by vengeance and instinct. As limbs flew and steel shattered against his blade, something deeper than survival took over. It wasn't about escape, it was about proof. Proof that no matter how broken he was, no one would be allowed to break him again. By the time the final body dropped, the forest had gone still, not out of peace, but fear. A silence that doesn't celebrate the end of violence, but recoils from it. The ground was soaked in blood, corpses piled like firewood, and in the center stood Guts, panting, bleeding, trembling beneath the weight of what he'd just done. Not triumph, not victorious, just standing. Because this wasn't a win. It was a warning that whatever humanity Guts had left was hanging by a thread. And that thread had just frayed a little more. He didn't smile. He didn't shout. He didn't even reflect. He just dragged his sword behind him, surrounded by the bodies of the men who once thought numbers would keep them safe. But in Berserk, victory is never clean. It's not heroic. It's not noble. It's survival at the cost of another piece of your soul. And for Guts, that piece gets steeper every time. He didn't leave clearing as a man. He left as something else. A beast in a human form, baptized in blood, and still hungry. Guts leaves Griffith, the shattering of fate. It didn't happen in a battlefield. There was no blood, no betrayal, no explosion, just a quiet morning under the rising sun. A duel between brothers. One man seeking his freedom, and another trying to stop it. Guts didn't leave the band of the Hawk out of anger or rebellion. He left because for the first time in his life, he wanted something of his own. A dream, not handed to him, not imposed but chosen. In that simple act, the silent declaration shattered everything. To Griffith, it wasn't just a soldier walking away. It was a limb being severed. Guts wasn't just a sword at his side. He was proof that Griffith's charisma, his identity, his control, could make even a man like Guts follow him without question. And when Guts left, not in hatred, but in quiet resolve, it broke something far more scared than allegiance. It broke Griffith's illusion of invincibility. There was no fight, no cries, just the cold sound of steel clashing the weight of a single strike, and the silence that followed. Guts won. Not just the duel, but the right to walk away. And Griffith stood there, stunned, watching the one person he couldn't command slip through his fingers. The man who led thousands, who seduced kings and conquered battlefields, had just lost the one soul he truly wanted to keep. But Griffith didn't cry, he didn't scream, he smiled, and then cracked. Not visibly, not right away, but something inside him bent that day. Bent in a way it could never unbend. Because some people don't take a loss as grief. They take it as a challenge. And in that moment, Griffith stood being the man who inspired dreams. He became the man who would destroy them if they ever dared to leave his orbit. Guts walking away wasn't a betrayal. It was a freedom. But to someone like Griffith, freedom was the deepest cut. Because when your dream depends on everyone staying with you, anyone who truly leaves becomes the enemy. Not out of malice, but because their absence exposes the truth. That your vision might not be as absolute as you believed. And from that truth, a wound opened. A wound like that, they don't just ache, they fester. Griffith's fall and imprisonment, wings buried by the sun. They called him Hawk of Light, a man who soared above the battlefield, who turned war into victory, and ambition into prophecy. Griffith didn't just lead, he enchanted. He wasn't just destined for greatness. He bent the idea of destiny itself to fit his dream. Nobles bowed to him, kings feared him, even enemies admired him. But in Berserk, the higher you climb, the harder the world pulls you back down. And Griffith didn't fall, he plummeted. One mistake one night, a moment of weakness, or maybe defiance. He took what wasn't his to take, the princess of Midland, and for that, the golden boy of the kingdom was dragged from his pedestal and cast into a nightmare, stripped of his title, his army, and his voice. Griffith was thrown into the dungeon beneath Wyndham Castle, not as a prisoner, but as something worse, a forgotten thing. The world he once commanded moved on without him. The nobles who praised him now whispered behind closed doors. His dream, that towering vision he built with blood and brilliance, began to rot, locked in a cage of iron and silence. They didn't just imprison him, they dismantled him, bit by bit, finger by finger, voice by voice. His tenderness was cut, his tongue ruined, his skin left to blister in the darkness. Time didn't pass in the dungeon. It stalled. The only sound was the drip of water and the slow unraveling of his sanity. And above, in the world he once ruled, his band of the Hawk was hunted like animals. Once heroes, now fugitives. Men who had followed him into the fire, now scattered to survive. The dream Griffith sold them began to turn into a tombstone. But here's the thing about Griffith. He doesn't break the way normal men do. He simmers. He waits, chained, disfigured, voiceless. His eyes never stopped burning. The dream didn't die in that dungeon. It muttered. The man who had once reached for the sun now stewed in its absence. And when the time came to rise again, he wouldn't do it as a hero. He wouldn't need to be whole. He'd rise with something else. Something colder, sharper. A hunger that couldn't be quenched by love or power or loyalty, because Griffith may have lost his wings, but he never stopped falling. And some men, when they fall far enough, don't land, they transform. The Eclipse, a prayer in blood. There are moments in stories when everything changes, but in Berserk, the Eclipse doesn't change the story. It ends it. There's no fanfare, no build-up, just a subtle shift, a quiet unease, a stillness too deep to trust. The sky turns red, the earth begins to bleed, and reality folds in on itself. What began as a celebration for Griffith's return became a descent, not into madness, but into design, because this was always meant to happen. The brand, the betrayal, the death, the god hand, those towering architects of fate descend not as invaders, but as hosts. This isn't an ambush, it's an invitation, and Griffith accepts it. Broken, voiceless, stripped of his beauty and strength, Griffith stands before them, not as a man, but as a vessel for something far colder. He is given a choice: sacrifice those who loved him, those who followed him without question, or let his dream die forever. And in the most silent scream history never heard, he chooses. One by one the band of the Hawk are branded, friends, brothers, sisters, all marked not for battle, but for slaughter. What follows isn't a massacre, it's consumption. Apostles pour from the darkness, grotesque creatures of lust and hunger, and the battlefield becomes a butcher's altar. No one is spared, no one dies clean. Limbs are torn, faces chewed off, screams stretched into madness, and in the center of it all is Guts, chained by fate, forced to watch it unfold. He fights, yes, he rages, he tears through the monsters with bare hands and broken blades, but it means nothing. He is only one man against an ocean of evil. And when his strength is gone, when his voice is hoarse from screaming, they make him watch one more thing. The final cruelty, the betrayal that scars more than flesh. Griffith is reborn, not as a man, but as Femto, the winged horror wearing his face. And the first thing he does is take Casca, the woman Guts loves, the one light he still had in the abyss, and violates her before his eyes. Held down, mutilated, helpless, the brand on Guts bleeds, but it's nothing compared to the bleeding inside. This isn't just loss, it's erasure of love, of dignity, of identity. The Eclipse doesn't kill the band of the Hawk, it erases their existence from the fabric of the world. No graves, no goodbyes, just silence, and the echo of broken trust. What's left behind isn't just death, it's a wound in the sharp of memory. And Guts, bloodied and screaming into an uncaring void, crawls from that place, not as a survivor, but as something reborn, not through light, through hatred, because the Eclipse wasn't an event. It was a turning point written in a bone, a ritual that buried away innocence and replaced it with fire. From that fire vengeance was born, and it would burn through heaven and hell without stopping. When Guts emerged from the Eclipse, he didn't walk into light. He crawled out of a nightmare, torn, shattered, and barely alive. He wasn't saved. He was spared. Not by mercy, but by cruelty, so profound it wanted him to live with it. Carved deep into the side of his neck was the brand of sacrifice, a mark that didn't celebrate survival, but condemned it. It wasn't a scar, it was a curse, a beacon for all things dark and damned. From that moment on, he became prey for every evil that moved in the night. Spirits crawled at his soul while he slept. Demons emerged from the shadows, with hunger in his eyes, and his name on their tongues. He could no longer close his eyes without risking death. Peace became myth. Sleep became a battlefield. He was alive, yes, but every hour he was borrowed, every breath contested. And the worst part? He didn't come back whole. Not physically, not emotionally. His right arm was gone, his left eye blinded. But deeper than that, something else was taken. Casca, the woman he loved, was still breathing, still there, but lost in a prison of silence and trauma. She couldn't speak, couldn't look at him without fear. She didn't remember who he was, only what had been done to her. And in that moment, surrounded by corpses and ghosts, and the broken shell of the person he had left, Guts understood. He hadn't lost a limb. He had lost his world. The brand made sure he'd never rest, never be free. It was a sentence with no parole. A promise from the dark that he would always be haunted, and yet it also gave him something else. It gave him a purpose, a reason, a target, a name. Femto, the one who stood where Griffith once was, the one who turned trust into trauma, love into violation, loyalty into slaughter. The brand made Guts a victim, but it also made him a relic of vengeance, a revenant forged, not by gods, but by rage. And from that curse, something new was born. Not hope, not redemption, but wrath. The Black Swordsman didn't rise with fanfare. He didn't seek justice. He sought blood, guided by a scar that bled every time evil drew near. He became a sword given form, not to protect, but to punish every shriek in the dark, every nightmare that came for him. He met it with steel and fury, because the brand may have made him prey, but it also turned him into the most dangerous prey there is, one who fights back. The man who emerged from the Eclipse was no longer a soldier, no longer a friend, a lover, a brother in arms. He was something else, something darker. The laughter that once filled campfires was gone. The warmth in his eyes, the faint hope in his voice, extinguished. All that remained was steel, cold, brutal, and unrelenting. Guts didn't just pick up the Dragon Slayer. He became it. A mountain of iron too large to be called a sword, too heavy for any sane man to wield, but perfect for a soul that no longer cared about elegance or honor. Every swing was a scream, every battle a funeral. He didn't fight to win, he fought to hurt, to carve through apostles and fiends, with raw hatred and bloodied will. One by one, he haunted them, not like a knight on a crusade, but like a wrath dragged hell behind him. But the rage was never hollow. Beneath every bone shattered blow was grief, blistering, festering, unresolved. He was just chasing monsters. He was chasing the question that tore at him more than any demon ever could. Why wasn't I enough? Why couldn't I save them? Why couldn't I stop them? The pain never dulled. It lived in his scars, in the stump where his arm once was, in the eye that no longer saw the world, only vengeance. And as he buried his enemies beneath waves of blood, he buried himself deeper too, under guilt, under trauma, under the unbearable weight of survival. He had no home, no peace, only the brand on his neck, bleeding each night, as evil haunted him in return. Sleep became torment, companionship a liability, and love a distant memory, buried beneath screams. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even an anti-hero. He was something else. A shadow in armor, a grief-strucken ghost, dragging his past like a corpse behind him, praying hopelessly that maybe if he spilled enough blood, he'd feel something again. Maybe revenge could fill the hole left behind, but it never does. And that's what makes the Black Swordsman so terrifying. Not just his strength, not just his skill, but the fact he has nothing left to lose, nothing left to become. The return of Griffith, a halo stained in blood. You'd think this story ends when the villain is gone, when justice is done, but Berserk was never that simple. Griffith returns, not broken, not scared, but radiant, untouched, charismatic, a man reborn into perfection, walking among kings as if he never fell. The world doesn't remember the dungeon, the screams, the bodies torn apart under a dying sky. It remembers his smile, his victories, his grace. Cities rise around him. Followers flock to him. People call him their savior. And the truth, the cost of it all, is buried beneath silence and awe. He doesn't conquer through force anymore. He does it through admiration. And that's the tragedy, that the man who fed his friends to monsters now walks through crowds of cheers, while the one who survived him, who carries the scars of that night and every bone, is treated as a shadow. God sees the world bowing to the man who stole everything, and worst of it all, Casca, broken by betrayal, still feels something stir when she looks at him. That's Griffith's true power. Not that he won, but that he made everyone forget he ever lost. That he rewrote his legacy. with the blood of his comrades, and no one dares to question the cost, not because they don't see it, but because they choose not to. Sometimes the most dangerous men aren't the ones who destroy nations, but the ones who inspire them.